Hello, and welcome to this VMware webcast. Today we're going to talk about vSphere 7. This is a topic we're super excited to share with you, and I hope you're as excited to learn about vSphere 7. My name is Himanshu Singh. I am a group manager of product marketing focusing on vSphere based out of the cloud platform team at VMware. And with me is Adam Eckerle, who's a group manager of technical marketing for vSphere as well in the cloud platform team. Now, when we talk about vSphere 7, we're introducing a concept of services, which is new to vSphere if you've been working with vSphere for a while. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what that means and how that kind of plays into what we're introducing with vSphere 7. It's all about the essential services for the modern hybrid cloud. So let's get started. Now, the big word that I want to focus on is applications. So if you look at how enterprises are really building a lot more applications today than they have in the past, it's all about meeting the needs of their customers, providing more richer functionality, providing or responding to some sort of a market need, for example, and be able to make sure that you're keeping up with the times, you're modernizing the approach that you have for your end customers. And so what we're seeing is that a lot of customers are, building more and more applications, and these applications are typically coming up as being built in the lines of business. We've seen that these IT spend from lines of business has actually exceeded the spend that's coming from core infrastructure and ops teams, and that gives you a sense of what's happening in the marketplace. Now, of course, when we talk about this trend to building more newer and modern applications, VMware has made sure that we are meeting the needs of the customers now and in the future. And so we have made a lot of updates to our offerings organically, and we've also made acquisitions over the past year or plus to make sure that we have a solid portfolio that meets the needs of customers when it comes to modern applications. Now, one of the things that has happened and that's fundamentally different about applications before and now is around how they're being built. What's the core architecture? And one of the fundamental changes that has happened is around moving away from monolithic applications that are predominantly VM only based, and that you have a kind of a simplistic representation on the slide there. And then moving into what we're calling as modern applications. And these applications are built as distributed systems. You have a core component, which is typically a Kubernetes cluster that uses containers as the core of the application, but then it is also consuming information and data and input from a variety of other sources. That could be other applications, that could be other databases running on virtual machines, might be leveraging GPUs, might be leveraging functionality from any kind of serverless components from a third-party source, for example. And so a lot more complexity is going into building these applications. The good thing, of course, is instead of starting from scratch, you can leverage functionality that's already been built to net come up with a more richer and more functional application for your end customers. Okay. Now, as I talked about, Kubernetes containers, etc. So that's been a big trend in the market. We're seeing that use of containers is absolutely skyrocketing and going, in terms of now and moving forward. But we're also seeing that a lot of this deployment is currently happening in the public cloud space. And moving forward, some of the projections from analysts is that there's a whole bunch of applications that customers like yourselves are running in your on-premises data center and across your hybrid cloud that are great candidates for modernization and containerization as well. And this is basically where VMware is making sure that we are available to meet your needs. All the applications that you're running on vSphere, for example, can be modernized and can be containerized as well. And of course, building net new applications. Now, one of the things that customers tell us is that, this is a newish field. It's not a new field. It's been around for a while, but, building using containers is still a little new for many organizations. And while creating the application and building it up front and popping it up is fantastic and smooth, people do face trouble when it comes to bringing the application to production. Right? When it actually scales, when you have to manage it and upgrade it and update it, there are challenges there. And this is exactly where vSphere, which has been solving this problem for you for years and years, can actually deliver value. And this is exactly what we're trying to do, making sure that the experience for our customers is paramount, making sure that you have a smooth sailing experience when it comes to building and managing and running your applications, whether it is using virtual machines or containers or any other components as you build these modern distributed applications. Okay. Another thing that customers have realized is that as they build more modern applications, they realize that there is a lot stronger need for really close collaboration between the IT team and the developer team, a lot more than what has been in the past. And so that's one key area that we are focused a lot on as well with vSphere 7. So on that note, essentially, let's talk about those three key personas or audiences that we really want to talk about. So there is the line of business leader. Well, they're looking to make sure that the applications they have that might be more monolithic today, they're not meeting the needs for what they really need for the business, right? And so they want to make sure that the customer experience is better. They want to make sure that they're able to meet any kind of market demands. They want to make sure that they're able to respond to any competitive pressures. So they are looking to the developers to build these modern applications. So developers sometimes face challenges around not having the right tool set that they need to build these applications. They might sometimes be hampered by the fact that they have to use a ticketing system and wait for IT to actually provision resources before they can start building. So that slows things down, and then that's definitely a challenge that needs to be addressed. Now, talking about the IT team, what they're finding out that as the lines of businesses build applications and as these applications get into production, they realize that, hey, managing infrastructure is not our kind of core skill set, and we need IT to be able to support it. So more and more of these siloed applications from different LOBs are coming up to IT to be able to support them. And the bigger the organization, the more lines of business, the more of these silos of infrastructure that IT has to manage now. And typically, you don't have consistency in terms of operations, you don't have consistency in terms of workflows, etc., or tools even, right? So IT is forced to learn new tools, support these environments, and that's always a challenge because you have limited resources and you still have to focus on things like performance and SLAs and those kind of things. One of the key things I also want to call out is that when you build applications with containers, some of the benefits that you get with virtual machines, with vSphere, for example, around security isolation and resource isolation are a bit of a challenge with containers. And so that's another key area that IT needs to be very sure that they have the tool set to offer the modern infrastructure to build modern applications, but at the same time, be able to make sure that security is addressed, resource isolation is addressed, so that from an SLA perspective, performance perspective, resiliency perspective, you don't have an impact on the business. All right. So essentially the idea being that, hey, now we need to create a solution that meets the needs of all these different audiences. And we want to make sure that we're focusing on the developers, we're making sure that we're focusing on the IT operations teams and get them get them collaborating more easily to be able to deliver innovation that the business really needs. And that basically is what the fundamental thought process is behind what we're delivering with vSphere 7. In terms of core value on vSphere 7, it's all about the essential services for the modern hybrid cloud. And there's three key areas where we are delivering value. It's about making sure that we are streamlining development. It's about making operations more agile and also driving innovation for the organization. At this point, I do want to call out that there is so much in vSphere 7 that we have to talk about it in kind of two different ways. One is vSphere with Kubernetes, which is kind of the superset of everything we have in vSphere 7. Okay, so that's vSphere with Kubernetes. And then there is kind of the core vSphere, or maybe you call it vSphere without Kubernetes. That is a set of capabilities that, as it would imply, it doesn't have the Kubernetes functionality or support, but it is more focused on all the existing business critical applications that you have today and that you're building using virtual machines as kind of the core building block, for example. Right? So I just want to make sure that I call that out, and I'll keep making sure that I call that out as I go forward as well, so there's no confusion. So overall, when we look at vSphere 7 or the vSphere with Kubernetes functionality, let's talk about what we're doing for developers. So developers really want to interact with services. They do not want to have to understand underlying infrastructure. And that's what they're used to in the cloud environment today as well, right? That they have consumable services that they actually connect to and leverage and be able to use their Kubernetes environment essentially to build their applications. And that's exactly what we're giving the developers with vSphere 7 as well. It's all about real-time access to infrastructure through the familiar Kubernetes API surface, right? And so developers do not have to go and learn about underlying infrastructure. They simply consume the services instead. And we'll go into a lot more detail about what that means and how that actually happens. When it comes to building using containers and deploying Kubernetes pods, there are a couple of options that we provide. So the premier option is, of course, the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid Service. And you might have heard about VMware Tanzu as the family of modern applications, cloud-native applications, containerized applications. And there's a lot there. And we had in mid-March, we had a kind of a launch event where you might have heard more about VMware Tanzu. And if not, go take a look as well. Really cool, exciting stuff there. But what we're doing is we are making sure that we are integrating the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid Service into vSphere with Kubernetes. And that essentially is a fully upstream conformant Kubernetes implementation so that you can build applications using that service that is going to be portable, that's going to be compatible with any other third-party services or components that you might be using, which are also upstream conformant with Kubernetes. So that's one option. However, in case you have specific use cases where you do not need a fully conformant Kubernetes implementation, you want to build using containers and Kubernetes pods, where that is not a requirement. We also have the vSphere pod service that you can use the developers can use to build containers. In this case, you do get some benefits around security, isolation, and performance gains as well. And we can talk more about that too. The second key area I want to address is around how are we making the life of IT ops better. One of the big thing that we're introducing with vSphere with Kubernetes is called application-focused management. So in the past or today, in general, when IT has to manage an application, you're essentially managing at the component level, right? So you're setting DRS policy at a component level. You're doing vMotion at a VM level, basically. In this case, what we're introducing is the concept of a namespace. So think of it as an envelope that you can draw around all the components of an application, right? You have an application that has a namespace, and you assign all the underlying components to that namespace. So now you can apply policy, you can do operations for the namespace at the application level, and it applies to all the underlying components. So from an efficiency perspective, this is massive, right? So you don't have to go component by component. And also, if you think about these modern applications, as I showed in one of the slides earlier, there's a lot of components there potentially, right? The granularity is very high, in which case there's a big improvement in terms of the overall efficiency and just like less headache for IT to kind of manage. In addition, we have other capabilities around simplification of the lifecycle management to the new vSphere Lifecycle Manager. We're adding more capabilities around intrinsic security with things like vSphere Trust Authority, things like introducing identity federation capabilities as well, and also making sure that we're delivering this unified platform that delivers consistent operations across any deployment location. Right? It could be on premises, it could be in the public cloud, it could be across hybrid cloud, edge locations, wherever it might be. vSphere has that capability for you. The third key area is around making sure that we are delivering a lot of capabilities that help with performance and and resiliency of all your business critical applications, AI, ML workloads, etc. So we are making improvements to DRS, which instead of focusing on a cluster level load balancing, it goes and focuses on the VMs to make sure that those workloads are happy and they're getting the resources that they need. We're making improvements to vMotion so that for large VMs, the stun times are significantly reduced, so you have a much smoother experience when we have to vMotion a significantly large VM, for example. We're introducing support for PTP, the Precision Time Protocol. So any specific workloads that are that require that specificity in timing, whether it is, for example, a financial trading application or a process manufacturing or HPC type of application, that's where there's a lot of benefit there as well. And we'll go into a lot more detail when Adam comes on and shares more details with you. But just to give you a snapshot to go ahead. So let me give you a little bit more detail on some of the experience with the Kubernetes piece, the vSphere with Kubernetes component, right? So from a developer perspective, what's the experience like? Hey, I simply look at this as my familiar Kubernetes API surface, right? I have access to these services that we're calling VMware Cloud Foundation services. You can use the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid service or the vSphere pod service to provision Kubernetes pods. You can use a storage service, a network service, a registry service, which basically uses Harbor at the back end. And from an IT perspective, I am able to provide this kind of a sandbox to the developer, and the developer has full freedom within it, right? So developer has self-service access. They're happy, but at the same time, because as IT, I am setting the policy for that sandbox. I'm making sure that I have governance, I have control, I can make sure that I can do the right level of access control, etc. as well. So all the fundamental things that IT needs to really manage are taken care of as well. So it's basically that best of both worlds to make sure that you're able to collaborate. And at the same time, IT is using that application-focused management capability. So what that means is it's much easier to collaborate across as the applications are being built and deployed. And also when it comes to things like troubleshooting and upgrading and updating, right? So as applications go into production, that collaboration is very, very fundamental in terms of its impact as well. Okay, let's take a little bit of a product view to this experience. And what that means is, from a VI admin perspective, I'm just connecting into vCenter server. I'm using the familiar vSphere web client that I have, and all these other kind of Kubernetes components and objects just show up in there in my tree view. I can do the operations that I have been doing in the past as well. So there's no disruption there. It's basically my existing skill sets. I know vSphere, so now I can support all these new Kubernetes workloads. From a developer perspective, it's basically the familiar Kubernetes API surface. I can use my kubectl commands. I can beans my CLI. I can provision and the resources that I need through these applications that I'm basically consuming and create my applications. Now, I just want to call out a little bit of detail here. So what you see is the VMware Cloud Foundation services that I mentioned earlier. And within that construct, there's Tanzu runtime services, which includes the Tanzu Kubernetes Grid service that I mentioned, and the hybrid infrastructure services that vSphere is also enabling in this case, that leverages all the underlying infrastructure components. So the vSphere with Kubernetes essentially is available as part of VMware Cloud Foundation. And we'll go into a little bit of the packaging later, but basically the idea being that as part of VMware Cloud Foundation, you've got underlying components across storage, across networking that are available. And so those are all exposable. IT is able to provision those as services, and they are able to be used by the developer teams. So that just makes it a lot smoother and a very cloud operating model in this particular case. All right, so let me switch now and talk about the core vSphere, right? So the non-Kubernetes capabilities, etc. So if you're not looking to build these applications using Kubernetes and containers, what's in it for you, right? So there's a significant amount of value that vSphere 7 contains for that particular use case as well. As I mentioned earlier, it's around simplification of lifecycle management. It's about a lot of enhancements to our intrinsic security capabilities and about helping with performance and resiliency of applications and to accelerate the applications that you're running in your environment. As I mentioned, there's a vSphere Lifecycle Manager that we'll talk into a lot more detail about. There's an update planner as well that's very useful because it helps you discover and plan your upgrades. It helps you run some what-if scenarios beforehand so that you can look at, for example, in terms of compatibility of other third-party components and be able to plan all that before you actually do the upgrade as well. For larger environments, you can benefit from automation of some of this using JSON and REST APIs as well. Now, when it comes to some of the intrinsic security capabilities, we've actually been doing a lot of this for vSphere for the past few releases with 6.5, 6.7. We've introduced a lot of capabilities around security. And we continue to do that because this is something that VMware overall in terms of our portfolio has really made sure to focus on. And one of the key things we're introducing with this on security is around what we're calling vSphere Trust Authority. And that's all about remote attestation. So essentially, instead of having to go and secure and apply security policies on every single host, you choose a few kind of trusted hosts, make sure that those are set, and then those in turn are able to secure other hosts in your environment. So it improves efficiency. It makes sure that there's a constant check in terms of any kind of deviation from that set policy. For example, in vSphere 7 or the core of vSphere 7, where in terms of if you have the use case where you're not really looking to build applications with Kubernetes, and you're focusing more on business critical applications you have today, you're building applications with virtual machines, what's in it for you? So let's talk about that. So there's three key areas, right, that we're delivering value in. It's around simplifying lifecycle management. That's around the lifecycle manager that I mentioned earlier. There's some additional capabilities around update planning, being able to run some what-if scenarios that help you plan out the update before you actually go through that as well. And for larger environments, there's benefit of being able to do some automation using JSON and REST APIs too. The second area is around what are some of the new capabilities we're delivering with intrinsic security. And this is something that we've focused on vSphere for the past few releases, and we continue to do that. So we're introducing vSphere Trust Authority that helps with remote attestation and making sure that there's a lot of more efficiency when it comes to ensuring the security of your environment. We're also introducing Identity Federation through ADFS at this point in time as well. Another key area is around performance and resiliency. So I talked about how DRS and vMotion have improvements. There's also additional support for some of the other capabilities like PTP, like Precision Time Protocol. There's also capabilities around assignable hardware, for example, and Adam will give you a lot more details about some of those as well. So let's keep moving right along. I think I covered the details here, so I'm going to skip on this slide. But let me talk about some of the key information around packaging that I was alluding to in the beginning. So all the vSphere core capabilities, right, are going to be available in the main editions of vSphere, vSphere Standard and Enterprise Plus. And on the vSphere website, just go to vSphere.com. You'll be able to see what features are landing in what edition, for example. We also have these other special editions like Scale Out, Robo, Essentials, etc., all available as well. The one thing to note is that vSphere Platinum is actually going end of availability, and so it won't be available for purchase anymore. However, it was a combination of vSphere Enterprise Plus and App Defense, and App Defense is still available as a standalone solution as it was in the past as well. Now, I do want to call out that the vSphere with Kubernetes capabilities are available only as part of VMware Cloud Foundation moving forward. So just keep that in mind. If you're looking for those capabilities, that's the kind of the product where it's available. And so VMware Cloud Foundation has all these different components, with vSphere NSX, vSAN, vRealize, etc. And by the way, there are multiple editions of VCF where some of these components might not be there. So all depends on what your particular use case might be. And what we're adding here is this vSphere with Kubernetes capabilities through this add-on within Cloud Foundation. That's available on a term license basis with 1 and 3 year options, while all the other components that you see on green on your screen, those are perpetual licenses. So just want to make sure that I call that out and give you that. All right, so with that, let me hand it over to Adam, who's going to take you into a lot more detail about some of the key capabilities that we want to highlight in core vSphere as well as vSphere with Kubernetes. Over to you, Adam.
Hey, thanks, Himanshu. So as Himanshu kind of winded down talking about vSphere with Kubernetes, that's kind of where I'm going to start. That's obviously a big part of this release, and it's super exciting to talk about because it's really a paradigm shift in how we manage applications with application-focused management and merge virtual machines and containers together. So we'll start off with that. But vSphere 7 is a huge release. There's a lot going on, even if you're not concerned with Kubernetes at all. Although I would argue that maybe we all should be at least learning about it. There's still, the core of vSphere is alive and well from an innovation perspective. We've taken DRS and vMotion, things that have been around for a long time, very mature technologies, and we've made some big changes there that I'll get into, along with assignable hardware, and then really making lifecycle simpler, as Himanshu kind of talked about earlier. And then obviously security is at the forefront of a lot of conversations these days. And so even back to vSphere 6.5, we were making big changes and leaps in innovation with security. And we're continuing down that path with things like identity federation and trust authority. So let's get into it. So just to frame things a little bit differently than Himanshu talked about earlier, we really have these two personas, the VI admin or the vSphere admin and the developer, your DevOps, your SREs. And they really want to do, they have similar needs in that they need infrastructure to do what they need to do, but they have different goals, right? vSphere admins, they're worried about different things, as you can see on the left side of the screen. And then developers, they really want infrastructure to consume, and they want it automated, and they want it easy. They want to just be able to run their kube control commands and have their Kubernetes clusters up and running. So this is what Project Pacific, or what we now call vSphere with Kubernetes, really brings to the table. And if we kind of unpack what applications look like today, these modern applications that we reference, cloud native applications, it's not simply, like enterprise applications where a lot of times it's a multi-tier application where we've got some sort of web front end, some sort of application middleware, and then some sort of database back end, right? This is pretty traditional enterprise application, right? Or pretty normal enterprise application. With things like microservices and modern applications, this is broken down into a bunch of different pieces, right? And there's good reasons to do that, right? We get more control over the pieces, we get more resiliency, we get more automation, we can spin up and scale out different parts of the application as needed, and put it all under a common control plane that is Kubernetes, right? So that is definitely a different way to manage applications than what vSphere admins are used to from previous years. So one of the ways that we address this is we take this new modern application, and we can with Kubernetes without vSphere, right? We can define what we want this application to look like through YAML files, right? And we create a spec. What kind of containers are used in this application? What kind of resiliency policies are in place? Are they load balanced in any way? So we can define all that, which makes things like scaling the application and providing that resiliency very, very easy. Kubernetes does a lot of complex work behind the scenes. I don't want to oversimplify Kubernetes itself because it's very complex technology, but it allows us to manage applications in a simpler fashion. So as I build this out, we can define all these parts of the application with YAML, and it greatly simplifies. So let's take advantage of that on top of vSphere, and let's do it in a way that we don't have to completely learn a whole bunch of new skill sets as vSphere admins, and let's integrate it right into vSphere so we don't have yet another technology that we have to learn and manage and operate. So one way that we do this, and I'll just go ahead and build this out, is with Tanzu Kubernetes Grid Service for vSphere. This is a fully conformant and upstream compliant Kubernetes that runs right on top of vSphere. So most customers, if they're running Kubernetes today or they're getting ready to run Kubernetes and they really want that fully conformant experience because perhaps they have experienced developers that are already working with Kubernetes and know the naming and the constructs and how to deploy it and build their applications in that way, this is going to be a great option for them. We also have, if I can advance the slide, we also have vSphere with Kubernetes built right into the hypervisor. Let me again just build this out. So the difference is that we sacrifice a little bit of functionality in terms of the conformance, right? The supervisor clusters are not a fully conformant Kubernetes distribution or control plane. What we've done is we've baked in parts of Kubernetes right into ESXi with the vSphere pod service, and we're providing that Kubernetes control plane, but also marrying that with some tried and true vSphere technology, VM isolation for a better security posture. And we also see, in certain cases, a little bit better performance. So if there are customers out there that maybe aren't using Kubernetes today and are just looking into it, and they're not worried about being fully conformant from a Kubernetes perspective, this is a great option for them. So what both of these options really do is give us a new way to manage applications, right? So if I put my vSphere admin hat back on, kind of abstract away this Kubernetes stuff for a minute, I'm going to look at applications as a whole instead of looking at the infrastructure, right? So we have this new construct called namespaces. Namespaces really, allow us to encapsulate an application, all the different components of it, and wrap policies around that application. So we can see that namespaces are backed by resource pools, which kind of makes sense, right? If you are building an application, you need a set of resources for that application, right? So with a namespace, we can give developers access, give them that sandbox if they're doing app dev, or give them a production workspace if they're going to actually be deploying an application, right? And so this allows us to tag certain types of storage that we want to be able to give them, certain CPU and memory, compute resources. We can provide access control, so we know who has access to those applications and to the components of those applications. And this is going to be super powerful, even if we're not talking about Kubernetes, even if we're just looking at VMs. This is really a paradigm shift in how we're managing the virtual machines, the applications, and somewhat the underlying infrastructure, right? We're not trying to figure out, hey, where's that SQL database VM running? Now with this namespace cluster, we have all those things encapsulated in one nice, neat management domain, if you will, to make it easier for all of our admins to administer and provide access. So namespaces is super important, regardless of if you're talking containers in Kubernetes or traditional virtual machines. So we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit and look more at core vSphere. These are going to be the things that get vSphere admins excited, even if they're not talking about Kubernetes. And as I mentioned at the top, this part of vSphere is still very much alive and well. And these are some of the best features that I've seen, since I've been working with VMware. So as we move into lifecycle, one of the things that we took a look at, and this is, we've been messaging this for a little while since vSphere 6.7, is that we gave vSphere admins and architects a lot of flexibility in how to deploy vCenter Server, right, the heart of vSphere. And we provided capabilities to do external PSCs or embedded PSCs and enhanced linked mode and throw PSCs behind a load balancer and all these different ways to deploy vCenter. And it turns out that flexibility came at a pretty steep cost, which is complexity. And that complexity really limited or added a lot of burden to administrators and architects in terms of either design or even just keeping vSphere up to date with the latest versions. So with vSphere 7, we've taken a lot of that complexity out. There's one way to deploy vCenter Server, and that's as an appliance. It's with an embedded PSC, regardless of if it's standalone or you want to deploy multiple in a vSphere SSO domain with enhanced linked mode. And we've greatly simplified how these components work together. So there's no difficult choices or trade-offs that you have to make when you're talking about either upgrade or design. This has also allowed some efficiency in what we're able to do from a scalability perspective. We've got a 3x improvement in the number of hosts and the number of powered on VMs we can manage in a linked mode domain or a vSphere SSO domain. That's up to 15,000 hosts and 150,000 VMs. So for those customers that are running and operating at that kind of scale, that's going to be super important because they're not going to have silos of vSphere SSO domains running around. They can start combining those and merging those into larger management domains to make operations and visibility much easier. Now, we're obviously not done yet. We're not going to stop there. There's customers that have many more VMs than that. So we need to we're going to continue doing this and scaling up. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out on this slide is latency. If you are operating at a global scale, latency between vCenter servers and between vCenter and ESX can be a challenge. With vSphere 6.7, we started doing a lot more testing, put a lot more visibility onto scenarios where customers might want to run a single global SSO domain. And so we see a modest increase in the latency here. And again, we are going to continue to invest in this area, and we want to give customers that flexibility to, be able to manage their infrastructure over long distances or even just unreliable connections. So a modest improvement, but we're going to continue improving here. So one of the other big things, there's really three big things that make vSphere Lifecycle Manager important and useful and valuable for customers. The first one is vCenter server profiles. So this is a way to make sure that all our vCenter servers are deployed and operating in a consistent fashion. So if you think about being able to take an operating vCenter, an already deployed vCenter, you can both list and export the configuration. This is, and when I say configuration, this specifically means when you go into the VAMI of the vCenter server, you'll see things like NTP configuration, IP configuration, administrator password expiration policy. That is the configuration. Those are the things that are included in this vCenter server profile. This isn't things like resource pool configuration, VM organization, folders, cluster configuration. Those are all constructs within vSphere and not the vCenter server itself. So I want to make that important distinction. Nonetheless, this is really important to ensure that we can deploy all of our vCenters in a consistent fashion, right? Because we don't want vCenter servers having different NTP configurations in most cases. We want that consistency so that we don't have problems within our linked mode domain. And of course, it's backed by a RESTful API that ensures that if we have automation tools, whether you're a customer or maybe you're a partner or someone who consultant that does deployments for customers, you have a way to automate this and deploy vCenters for your customers in a not only an automated fashion, but a consistent fashion, that you also have some documentation on how you deployed it because we have this JSON file. So really cool tech that I'm excited about because I deploy a lot of vCenters in the lab. So that's good for a lot of people. Next, we have the ESXi hosts. We talked about vCenter. Now with ESXi, we're moving to this desired state configuration model, right? Today or prior to vSphere 7, we had things like auto deploy and host profiles. With cluster image management, we're kind of up leveling those types of constructs into this cluster image, which consists of an ESXi version, a set of drivers that could be native ESXi drivers, that could be drivers from our OEM partners like Dell and HPE, and then of course firmware packages. So we're going to take all of these things that make up a stable server build, and we're going to put those into one single cluster image, and we're going to deploy that across an entire cluster, right? So now we can ensure all of the servers in a given cluster are running the exact same versions of everything. This is super important, especially when we're talking about things like Cloud Foundation and vSAN, right? We want to make sure all those servers are not only running the same things, but also using our recommendation engine to ensure that we're running the recommended versions of these drivers and firmware by our OEM partners to make sure that those vSAN deployments are screaming fast. So there's an added amount of value for vSAN customers there. But even if you're not using vSAN, even if you're running Cloud Foundation with an external storage array, this is still very valuable because, again, consistency, desired state config across an entire cluster. The third thing that makes up vSphere Lifecycle Manager with vSphere 7 is the vCenter Server Update Planner. I talked when I was talking about the simplified architecture with vCenter. That is a big on-ramp to allow customers to upgrade quicker and stay up to date. But nonetheless, vSphere upgrades are still complex. It's not just about vSphere. Customers are running lots of different products, whether it be VMware products or third-party products within their vSphere environments. vCenter Update Planner has been built to be an integrated tool right into the vSphere client that allows you to kind of take stock what's in the environment. We provide recommendations and prescriptive guidance on how to get from where you're at today to where you want to go. We've greatly enhanced the pre-update checks to make it as foolproof as we can to show you things, potholes that you might run into during the process so that we can remediate those and fix them before you even get started. So that's important. And then the what if scenarios are a big deal because, again, you can kind of simulate the process as you go and identify those things that may have caused problems when you try to perform that upgrade. So this is built right into the vSphere client. Also to note, this is a future-facing tool in that it's not going to help you upgrade from vSphere 6.5 or vSphere 6.7 to 7.0, but it will help you from 7 going forward. So just want to make that clear because there's a lot of new technology in this function, so that's why it's not necessarily possible to use it with vSphere 6, 6.x, I should say. So another focus area is intrinsic security. You've probably heard this a bunch of different times, but one of the areas that I've worked on for years is certificate management. I can tell you through quite a few VMworld talks and lots of content generation that this has always been a sore spot for customers. I've always been able to say that we've kept improving over the years, and vSphere 7 is certainly no different. One of the things in vSphere 7 is that we've just taken the sheer amount of certificates and we've reduced them, which is greatly reducing the amount of overhead that we have. You can see on the screen with vSphere 6X, there's just a lot of different certificates that we have to manage and manage the lifecycle of in the environment. We have to renew these things, and if we need to revoke a certificate, we have to change it out and things like that. So lots of overhead involved in that. So with vSphere 7, it's just so greatly simplified. There's a machine TLS cert that sits on the reverse proxy within the vCenter server. All of the services communicate through that reverse proxy, which is secured by this machine certificate. And then we have the trusted root certificate, which is what is part of the VMC and the PSC service. So just by reducing the number of certificates, it's so much simpler now. And we've also added a new RESTful API to manage the certificates, and there's a new UI wizard to help you with things like renewal right in the vSphere client. So it's not just about the reduction, that's a big part of it, but there's some additional functionality that I think are really going to please vSphere administrators. Next, we've got identity federation. So one of the things we've learned along the way is that customers continuously push the boundaries in trying to get other solutions to work with vCenter from not only a identity perspective, but also from or an authentication perspective, but also an authorization perspective, right? And it gets a little cumbersome trying to extend vCenter server into all of those different technologies. So the road that we decided to take was let's take vCenter sort of out of that business, and let's leverage all these great technologies from our technology partners that do this really well. Let's just plug into them and let them handle things like MFA or multi-factor authentication. And so vSphere 7, we support Active Directory federation services out of the box. So essentially what that means is there's a lot of different technologies that can tie into ADFS, like MFA solutions. Let's leverage those to log into ADFS, which then proxies that authentication to vCenter server. So in effect, we're able to offload or let things like ADFS, which is what we support with vSphere 7, handle those things. And let's let vCenter focus on the things it does well, like manage the vSphere environment. So we'll continuously improve this. We'll add additional authentication providers over time. It's not just going to be all in on ADFS, although that is a well-adopted solution. So that's where we're starting. We also have this idea called trust authority in vSphere 7. So before I talk about where we're at with vSphere 7, let's kind of set the stage with where we came from with vSphere 6.7. So we had the idea of attestation. We can do things like VM encryption with vSphere 6.7, but and even 6.5. But one of the challenges is that vCenter server is sort of the keys to the kingdom, right? It's in the center of everything. So then we can't encrypt vCenter server because it's the thing that's managing the keys. Sort of, you can't use the keys to encrypt the keys kind of thing. So the challenge is, how do we, vCenter server is arguably an important attack vector, because if someone can get access to vCenter server, then, they can sort of get, wherever they want within the environment. So we needed a way to also protect vCenter server, and really just a more scalable way to protect the environment. So with vSphere 7, we introduced vSphere Trust Authority. Essentially what this means is we take a dedicated set of ESXi hosts, and we move all of the key management functions, all the interactions with the key manager, to those trusted hosts. This takes vCenter server out of that critical path and allows us to do things like encrypt vCenter. So again, we're protecting sort of the brains of the operation by offloading these functions to trusted hosts. Now, you may be thinking, well, do I need to buy dedicated hosts for the trusted hosts? And the answer is no. You can, if you have a management cluster already, you can use those hosts that are already running other management workloads. You can use those as the trusted hosts. This also means that TPM chips are hugely important. We've been saying for a while now, but certainly with trusted authority, because the trusted hosts use the TPM chips, they just order all of your servers with TPM chips. They're literally like $35 or $40 from the manufacturers. It's one less thing that you have to retrofit if you would need to. Just have your partners, your OEM server vendors add the TPM chips right into the host. That way, if you do decide to use Trust Authority or really lots of the security features that we have in vSphere, the chips are already there and available for you. Next, we have VSGX. This is really us just supporting a feature that Intel built inside their latest generation of processors. It allows an application to store secure and sensitive data in a secure location, the secure enclave. AMD does something similar, but it's really a completely different approach. For vSphere 7, we're supporting the Intel secure enclave because we understand that as security continues to proliferate, or the importance of security, we needed to give applications a place and support this functionality from Intel. So this isn't about the virtual machines and the guest operating systems having a location. They can already do that through various encryption mechanisms. But we needed a way for applications to store that data as it traverses these different layers that you can see in the image, the operating system, the VMM. As the data traverses those layers, there's a potential for attack vectors. So VSGX gives those applications a way to store that data without adding that additional risk. Next, we're going to pivot to application acceleration. Now, when you think about AppExcel, you may think about things like GPUs and PCI cards and NVMe and all those fun things, which is absolutely a part of this. But that's not all. I'm going to start with DRS. I mentioned at the top that we've taken a mature technology like DRS and we've refactored it. We've taken it from a cluster-centric tool and made it a VM-centric tool, right? A workload-centric tool. While we do care about the health and the happiness of clusters, what really matters is the happiness of the VMs and its neighbors, right? So if we look at an application, we want to make sure that when we move a VM around, that it is a positive net experience for that virtual machine and thus for that application. We don't want to, the old model is sort of moving VMs around to ensure cluster balance, right? Are all the hosts or all the resources of the cluster balanced? Improved DRS makes it so that we do have this VM DRS score so that we have the insight and have these things at a much more granular level. We're doing these calculations every 1 minute instead of every 5, and this results in a much improved VM happiness across the board rather than looking at hosts and resources. So next we have assignable hardware. Assignable hardware is really a framework that enables some of the DRS improvements and vSphere HA. So we can have visibility to see some of these specialized hardware devices like GPUs and PCIe cards that are attached to these VMs. And DRS can do initial placement based on that hardware availability within the cluster, and vSphere HA can restart VMs during an HA event based on availability in the cluster. Prior to assignable hardware, DRS and HA could not restart those VMs or move those VMs around or do that initial placement calculation. I also mentioned that we've also rebuilt vMotion. This is really for large VMs, high I/O VMs. Those VMs really had challenges with the stun time switching over to a new host during a vMotion. We've broken this down, and we've greatly reduced that stun time through various measures. You can learn about exactly how on the vSphere blog. Niels Haggart has created some videos and blog posts specifically on this topic. But just know that we really believe that there are very few workloads, if any, out there that can't benefit from vMotion. So vSphere admins should not have to disable vMotion for hardly any workloads, including things like SAP HANA and Oracle. Last thing that I'm going to talk about is Bitfusion. Think about Bitfusion as a way to abstract specialized hardware. So we have GPUs, FPGAs, and ASICs in servers. Bitfusion allows us to access those resources over the network. So now we don't have to confine VMs to specific hosts. We abstract those resources and make them available to a really broad range of virtual machines. So this abstraction is huge because these pieces of hardware are very expensive, and this unlocks huge potential for sharing out these resources to other workloads. So this is going to be a game changer. It's tech preview today. You'll probably hear an announcement very soon, and we can talk much more about this in the coming future. So with that, I will turn it back over to my colleague Himanshu to wrap us up.
All right, folks. I hope that this session has given you a lot of value in terms of really understanding all the details of vSphere. Now, I will say this. We do have a lot of content available on vSphere.com, and also go to the vSphere blog. There's been a lot of deep dive blog posts that we've published over there. We did have some slideware to talk about, hey, what are the top 10 reasons to upgrade to vSphere 7? We don't have time to go over them, but just keeping these so that you can refer to them. We can download the slides essentially. I do want to call out that vSphere 6.0 has gone end of general support. So hopefully you've already upgraded to 6.5 or 6.7 and are looking at upgrading to 7 at this point in time. But if not, please do so. There are some resources that are linked from the slides that you can refer to from our upgrade center and other extended support potentially if you need to do that as well. As customers have started adopting and playing around with vSphere, we're very happy to see that their feedback coming through and how vSphere with Kubernetes can help them accelerate their application development while maintaining security for their environments. How the capabilities that that we're introducing with vSphere are making sure that IT is able to support Kubernetes workloads just because they know vSphere, right? They don't have to go and learn a whole bunch of net new skill sets in this particular case and being able to deploy wherever they need. All the other capabilities around lifecycle management and updates, etc., just makes the life of IT a lot better. So we're very happy to hear feedback from customers. So what I would say is go ahead, try it out. If you haven't gotten your hands on vSphere 7 yet, and we look forward to getting more and more of your feedback as well. Last thing I'll leave you with is this quote from Joe Beda, who's a principal engineer at VMware and also one of the founders of Kubernetes. And his point is around, hey, cloud isn't a place where you have to operate. It's a way of doing things. It's how you operate. And with vSphere 7, the cloud operating model is what we're bringing to you and delivering to you. And so we're very excited to bring it to market. And we are more excited than that to see how you work with it, how you build applications with it. And so give us all your feedback through various channels available, through social media, through comments on our vSphere blog post, for example, and reach out to your sales teams as well. Again, keep asking your questions in the Q&A. And thank you so much for joining us for this session. from both Adam and I. Thanks a lot.